from Emerson College in beautiful downtown Boston. This is the Jeff Santos Show. Rebuilding America. Together. Investing, activism, and supporting the middle class.
Live in Studio A on the campus of Emerson College. It is great to be with you on this 28th of June, 2016. It's great to be back with you after a couple of days away. We're going to talk with Mark Taylor-Canfield, who will be with us coming up at about 6 minutes past, about a number of issues. We'll also talk with Scott Paul. The Brexit vote, the UK leaving the EU is what we're going to be focused on for most of the show. We'll get different perspectives from Scott Paul, of course, the president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing, Mr. Robert Craig, executive director of Wisconsin Citizen Action. Of course, we've talked many times about how this issue of trade, which was a big part that mainstream media hasn't really focused on, we'll get his thoughts on that, and particularly in Wisconsin, and particularly in the Midwest, where Mr. Trump was today. The New York real estate tycoon who was talking about his great new suites at the country club in Scotland the other day, when he could have been talking about what this EU exit meant. That'll be interesting to see how they parlay this. It was kind of campaign 101 to focus on the issue of the day, particularly when you're in the country of the UK to do this. But he wanted to talk about how good the sprinkler system is. I will say this, though, and talking to some people over the weekend on the phone, is that as bad as a month as the buffoon from New York, Mr. Trump, has had, he is only in the NBC poll, and I think one other poll, maybe CNN, only down by 5 to 7 points, depending upon which one you look at. He has yet to have his convention, which will get his bounce. He's yet to pick his vice president, which will have his bounce, although who knows, it could pick Bozo the Clown. And Democrats have to be very careful, and we're going to talk today about this concept. If Hillary Clinton decides to pick a Tim Kaine or a Castro or somebody other than Elizabeth Warren and Sherrod Brown, who are on the record against TPP and have led the way against it. They both have been on this show, and disappointed in Elizabeth Warren not endorsing Bernie, particularly after New Hampshire, and Sherrod Brown early on endorsing Hillary Clinton. But I believe that they are the only choices that Hillary Clinton has if she wants to get Bernie Sanders supporters to support her candidacy. We'll come back, take your calls. It's the Jeff Santos Show. Back in a flash.
What do you think? Let's get it!
Getting it. Mama needs something new. Getting it.
Thank you, Shane, and good afternoon, Americans, and welcome to the Jeff Santos Show. We are live in Studio A on the campus of Emerson College. It is great to be back with you on this 28th of June, 2016. We got a great program for you today. Mark Taylor-Canfield will join us in a couple of minutes. Then Scott Paul, president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing, for 15 minutes today at 4:34. And then we'll wrap it up with Robert Craig for the entire hour. Of course, your phone calls are welcome today at 772-925-8206. You can email me, Jeff at revolutionboston.com. Check us out on both Facebook and Twitter at Jeff Santos Show. One of the things that I must tell you was it's great to be back with you today, and had a chance to watch a lot of television over the weekend. As I said in the earlier introduction, I am now back after surgery on Friday. I want to thank again our doctors and nurses at Mount Auburn Hospital here in Cambridge. I had my gallbladder removed over the weekend on Friday, and it's a pretty intense operation. It takes a couple hours, but the recovery period is a little bit more, and dealing with the after effects, and hopefully it will be shorter rather than a longer recovery period. But one of the things that you have the chance to do when you're kind of forced to sort of, be homebound for a few days is to watch a lot of television. And I tweeted out on Thursday night, just after the Brexit vote, that I was hoping that the American media, and crossing my fingers, but really not expecting much, would really focus on the trade issue and what this meant, and the job loss to rural England and Wales. Scotland, as you know, voted to stay in the EU. And I really believe that there is a nationalism issue here. There's no doubt that that played a role, that anti-immigration played a role. To a lesser extent, xenophobia, I think, played a role here. There are a lot of, in London, for instance, Pakistanis. They derogatively have called it for years, going back to the 80s when I was there, as Pakis. And just like the racism that African Americans have faced and Latinos have faced and still face in this country, they have been second-class citizens. But London is more diverse than ever before. It has a large Muslim population, Arab population. So a lot of people, though, outside of London, who don't have the jobs that they once did, because basically we are all working for a handful of corporations today. And those corporations take those jobs overseas. Those corporations take those jobs and they absolve them, or they make it automated, so their jobs are just not there anymore. So for those who are well-educated, particularly younger folks who voted to stay in the EU, who live in London and the London suburbs, I think that they feel that this is a no-brainer. We are living in a diverse country. I grew up, meaning people who lived in London who were in their 20s, with Pakistanis to the right and Muslims to the left, to those who have come from Poland and all the other European countries. It's not a big deal. But for those who didn't grow up with that and who now see their incomes reduced, sometimes they're unemployed on the quote-unquote dole, it's not an easy life. Now, there's a certain part of it that you can't be racist towards somebody, but there's also a sense of where my community has gone, where my government has gone. So if you're thinking about where we are in the United States versus the UK, then think about all these cities that we talk about in Ohio and Pennsylvania, factory towns, from Allentown to New Bedford to New Haven. Of course, New Haven has the great university, Yale. But just think, if Yale wasn't there in New Haven, what New Haven would be like, all the textile factories that are gone. You can go on and on, all the way down the eastern seaboard and all the way out to the Rocky Mountains. And the fact is that there are hollow places. I think of Lorain, Ohio, as an example. And to me, this is what is happening. We haven't got much reporting. We haven't got much analysis about this from most mainstream media in America. But the fact is this. There is a need here. There is a need here in this country to start focusing on our communities that are not Boston, Cambridge, or parts of Seattle, or Chicago in the Michigan Avenue, or in Manhattan. There are a lot of places that are not, just booming, bunch of cranes and a lot of people who are making six figures. There are a lot of people who are barely making it. And that's how we need to tie this together. All right. Our next guest does that in his daily briefs, his daily journals. He is a great contributor to the Jeff Santos Show every Tuesday. Of course, also pens for the Daily Coast and several other great periodicals and websites. The one and only Mark Taylor-Canfield joins us on the line live from Seattle. Happy Tuesday, Mark.
How are you, Jeff? Yes, it's actually sunny in Seattle, but I'm not supposed to tell you that, right? It's always raining here. That's the reputation we want. Yes.
Yes, you keep those Californians out, right?
We actually did have some great solstice celebration, and then Gay Pride was over the weekend, and there was a big transgender rights march with our police chief, former police commissioner from Boston, Kathleen O'Toole, leading the march. So that's been a big issue in Seattle. Yeah, there was unfortunately a transgender member of the community who was attacked last week, so that was part of the mayor's response.
I think it's important, and I'm glad to see that that Mayor Murray is doing the right thing. But I want to talk to you, though, about whether or not these political leaders, and I give credit to Mr. Murray for what he's done there, and on other issues, including, I think, moving forward with the minimum wage issue. But I am wondering about the economic concerns. And, you know, we talk a lot about the expense of Seattle, and every day when you come on, you talk about it. I talk about it here with Boston, Cambridge, where I live, and we see it in Manhattan, we see it in Los Angeles, and a lot of major cities where, you know, it costs a lot of money to live. Now, the people who live outside of these metropolitan areas, or maybe they're living, you know, in really ramshackle housing because that's the only thing they can afford. I think this plays into what was going on in the UK, Mark. And I want to get your thoughts about, you know, what the reaction was on the Brexit. You know, obviously there is a xenophobic, there is a anti-immigration issue to that. But I don't think, and we haven't received, I think, a lot of American media focus on what it's like for somebody that doesn't live in the, you know, hot and, you know, cool locations. And I think that if you're living in Cardiff, Wales, or if you're living in Birmingham, England, home of Ozzy Osbourne, you know, you have to think that it's not an easy life. And if people who had jobs 20 years ago, whether they were owning their own pub or their own grocery store or whatever the case may be, are now reduced to being on the dole or working part-time or maybe working two part-time jobs, there is something here. And I think that the American media and the American Democratic Party should be very aware that what we have seen in the EU vote is something that has been spurring up here, particularly in the industrial Northeast and the Midwest, and probably in places that, you know, that don't get talked about because it's, you know, it's great to talk to the young kids that are coming in from all over the world, you know, that end up working for Microsoft or Amazon.com. But there are a lot of other people who have lived and worked in Seattle who are being shoved aside. Your thoughts on all of this? Because I think this is something that, again, mainstream media hasn't picked up on.
Well, first of all, I think some of the news reports I've seen tell me that a lot of the folks in the UK did not know exactly what they were voting for. They certainly didn't think that they were voting for economic chaos and, you know, a downturn in the international stock markets. Number two, England has always been referred to, and somewhat derisively at times in history, as a country of shopkeepers. And that means that there's always been a big merchant class in England. It had a lot to do with the empire building that took place. A lot of that were merchants, you know, who owned local businesses. Some of them were landed gentry, but most of them were local merchants, and all of their money was in their shop or in their boat ship,
Sure.
or whatever their equipment was. So much like in the United States with these international trade agreements, you have folks, right here in Seattle who are being pushed aside. Their small businesses are disappearing overnight because the cost of the rent is so high now because of the real estate bubble here. And so they just sell out. And so unfortunately, we're losing a lot of local businesses, people that they're the owners of the shop, the store you frequent, their family, we exchange, holiday cards, that kind of thing. All of a sudden, they're gone, and it's another chain store. So same thing has happened in the UK. The Tesco's are really big in the UK, and they were, that's a place where a lot of people went when I was there. But in small villages and small towns throughout the UK and Europe, these are very small communities with local businesses who cannot compete with these multinational corporations. And so you have a situation now where there's economic chaos, although it looks like the U.S. stock market has calmed down a bit. But, I just wonder, Jeff, if folks in the UK really knew what they were voting for. It was a very contentious, controversial, and at one point even violent, discussion that was going on there with the assassination of a member of parliament. So, very serious issue. The UK has never wanted to really be a part of the European economic community ever since the days of Margaret Thatcher. They've kept the pound, and resisted the euro, which has kept the pound as the high valued currency in the world. So we'll see what happens next. But there's big changes going on in the world, and it's happening so quickly that I think a lot of people don't really realize what's going on. And you're right, the corporate media especially is not reporting on how these issues affect people on a daily basis in their daily lives in their own community.
At the same time, we've had terrorist attacks throughout Western Europe, and people need to seriously look at the policies of their government, like the United States. When you're in the Middle East, that's another part of the whole issue. And I think the fact that people in Great Britain, in the UK, and again Scotland decided to stay, which is rather interesting because they maybe want their independence more than anything else. And a connection with the EU is probably a lifesaver for them. To try to compete, against all these other countries would be hard for them. But, I do believe that this, I hope, opens up a dialogue in this country as well as in the UK to discuss, why people are afraid or why people are angry and pissed off that these things are going on. And I think that it is really important for media both here and in the UK to sort of focus on it, not just, who's going to take over in the Conservative Party, is Labour going to stay? These are all issues that, of course, are important. But in the end, if you're not going to really find out why these people would do something like this, and it's pretty massive thing to do, to sort of say, look, we want to be out of this, good union. I want to also say this, and if you agree with me here, I think the idea of the EU, and we've talked with John Bruton, a former EU ambassador to the U.S., former Prime Minister of Ireland, and we're going to try to get him on this week. I like the idea of all these countries coming together. We don't want to have, all-powerful Germany, which is a powerful economic force, end up by themselves with their own military. We don't want to see history repeat itself. And, I think that it's important, but maybe, just maybe, we need to think about a different kind of EU alliance. And just as we all love to be with Mexico and Canada, but NAFTA has been a disaster. And that doesn't bring us together. If anything, it pulls us apart. Your view?
Well, there's a huge economic shift happening in Europe that started back in 2008, just like in the United States. There's a huge problem with the banking industry and the currency issue. So this is not a new problem. I think they've been battling for years over it, but it's been swept under the rug. We saw what happened in Greece, with the economic collapse there. Other countries in Europe have gone through the same thing. There's no guarantee that this won't happen again. There's been a lot of stopgap efforts made in Europe and in the United States to hoist up the banking system, to reinforce the system so that it will continue to work. But there's a lot of economic shifts going on. Economics are changing really quickly in the United States, as we've seen with the Bernie Sanders campaign, where suddenly people are starting to think, hey, maybe we need to kind of rein in some of this unlimited, unrestricted capitalism and start to take care of people. Well, in Europe, they've been trying to do that for years, but there's also a big move there amongst some, and some might include the IMF in this. There's a big austerity push going on. The World Bank and the European bankers are pushing austerity measures on countries that have owed a lot of money. And so that's cut into social programs. We've had uprisings in France and other countries over changes in labor laws. So there's a big battle going on economically between the powerful, who have lots and lots of money and wealth, and those folks that are just trying to survive on a daily basis. And we see it in Europe as well. So I think, unfortunately, Jeff, this may be just the beginning of more economic crisis and chaos in Europe and potentially in North America as well.
Talking with our good friend Mark Taylor-Canfield here on the Jeff Santos Show. The phone number to join us, of course, 772-925-8206. You can email me, Jeff at revolutionboston.com. Check us out on Facebook and Twitter at Jeff Santos Show. You talk about Bernie Sanders, and, a lot of people, who love this show and who love Bernie Sanders have communicated with me over the weekend. Good friend Elizabeth in Massachusetts here saying Bernie's the only one. I know that people in Seattle are a little concerned about the fact that Sanders had said he would vote for Hillary Clinton. Where do you think Sanders should be on this entire Brexit? He made a statement. I thought it was a good one. But I think he needs to really, hone in on this. And maybe he's not going to get the attention because, it's typical MSNBC, CNN. But he should try to take that, I believe, issue of concern and job loss, in particularly rural America, and the hard-hit industrial belt of the Midwest, where he did very well in Wisconsin and Michigan. And try to make it clear, because people, want to, I think, continue to hear from him on a lot of these issues. Your view, Mark, and what you're hearing in Seattle.
Well, Seattle does have a different economy. You mentioned the Google and the Googleites and Amazonians, as we call them here, and the tech and biomed industry especially is really big in Seattle. So we haven't had the Rust Belt effect, where cities like Detroit have just gone completely bankrupt. But It is an issue that is a populist issue across the country, and we're not immune to it. Of course, in Washington State, there are rural communities where there's high unemployment and very, very little opportunity. But in the Midwest, this has been a huge issue. It's a populist issue, as I said, and I think Bernie Sanders surprisingly came across during his campaign as a populist candidate. Nobody was talking too much about social democracy or democratic socialism. They were talking about specific issues of job security, labor rights, civil rights, economic and environmental issues. So I think he really would do well if he reached out to those working class folks across the country who are not making enough money to really do as well as their parents, which is also typical in the Northwest. If you have a high-tech or professional job, you're probably doing just fine. But a lot of folks who have kept near minimum wage jobs for years or have worked 2 or 3 jobs are finding it really difficult to raise families with the cost of living, the cost of medical insurance, etc., or the lack of medical insurance on some of their jobs. So in Washington State, you still have the same issue that Bernie Sanders is dealing with in the Midwest, which is the middle class having disappeared to a large degree, and a generation of folks coming up who may find it really difficult, if not impossible, to buy a home, to, own several cars or a small boat. That was the middle class dream that so many Americans pursued. I know my own parents have a very nice retirement pension and are doing quite well and really enjoying their lives. I'm not so sure that is going to be true for their children if something doesn't change in this country. Because right now the working class is being squeezed and they're not getting much benefit from these huge profits that the corporations are making.
No doubt. Mark Taylor-Canfield, we'll talk to you next Tuesday, my friend. Thank you. Have yourself a good rest of the week.
Yes, check my stuff out at Daily Kos and the Seattle Star and Democracy Watch News on Facebook and Twitter. See you next week.
Take it easy. Is our next guest, Mr. Scott Paul, who comes to us from Washington, D.C. to discuss Brexit and the issue of trade and how the U.K. and the U.S. have suffered on trade deals, and partly maybe one of the reasons why, even though American media doesn't focus on it, that we saw the breakup with Britain and the EU. Scott, great to have you back on the show. Hope you're well today.
Likewise, Jeff, wish you a speedy recovery, and thanks for having me on to talk about this important issue.
Well, thank you. Well, I want to just get your thoughts here, because the first thing that I talked about, and I texted out on or tweeted out on Thursday evening, Friday morning when all this happened, was, will the American media focus on the issue of trade and focus on the issue of job loss in places like Cardiff, Wales, and Birmingham, England, and other places, just as we really don't focus much on places like Toledo, Ohio, or Buffalo, New York, or, New Bedford, Massachusetts, or Allentown, Pennsylvania. And I think that unfortunately have been proven correct, that I wasn't correct. There wasn't any focus on this. A lot about process, who's going to be the next prime minister, yada, yada. Your view from your perspective, because this is an issue that you study in America, but you also look at it from, the world perspective. What do you make of it, and what are the connections, you think, for the American voter and the American citizen?
Yeah, Jeff, I think it's a really good and important question, and that the process kind of TikTok thing is interesting for some to observe, because the underlying issues are a little more complex, but they're also the underlying causes of why we have to talk about the process. And it was, at first I would say, we can't, what happens is, Britain and the United States aren't the same. We both speak English, although in very different ways, and that's kind of the same as our politics. And there's kind of a right of center party, there's a middle party, there's a left of center party, but even among those parties, the views really broke down there, and and you've kind of seen that play out in the American primaries too. So you're wondering, hey, what's the commonality here? And as best as I can tell, it seems like there's this sense of disenfranchisement. There's this sense of hopelessness. There's this sense that there are stale institutions that aren't listening to the concerns of common people. I will say, just trying to navigate the European Commission on regulatory issues is not an easy thing to do for a business. So you can imagine how kind of distant it seems to the average voter in the United Kingdom. And so it is, what it says to me is that there is a cost to this inflexibility and this unwillingness to change from doctrine, whether it is austerity or kind of neoliberal economic policies that include much more openness on trade that can lead to job displacement. And, in the case of the EU, you also had a country, Germany, that was very concerned about standing up to China on trade policy because it wanted access for its automakers. And as a result, the EU wasn't nearly as forceful in protecting its industrial interests that faced imports, including some of those in the United Kingdom, as it should have been. And the United States hadn't done a great job, but we've done a better job than the EU in a lot of ways. And so it is. I mean, to me, there's a couple of lessons. One is that you have to take these concerns seriously. You can't dismiss, Trump voters, in the Democratic primary. And I know you've covered this extensively, Jeff. You can't dismiss, the progressive voters who felt very strongly and passionately about Bernie Sanders and continue to do so. It's just, it is part of our conversation, and to set that aside and say, oh, they aren't serious, is a serious mistake, I think, because there are consequences to that, and you saw that in the vote.
There's no doubt. Talking with our good friend Scott Paul, President of the Alliance for American Manufacturing, here on the Jeff Santos Show. Look, I think that, and I would urge Senator Sanders to try to link these two, to tell the American people, of what is at stake here, and that you can be bamboozled, to use a word that President Obama likes to use a lot, if you listen to Trump. Now, look. I'm going to say something that, may annoy a lot of Democrats and liberals, but I would like to see Trump make a statement. He was today talking, and I thought a very effective speech in Western Pennsylvania about making it with American steel and doing all this. But I think he could do something that I think would give him some credibility, which sometimes he lacks, particularly on Friday when all this was going on and he was talking about, how good a sprinkler system was in the country club in the UK, in Scotland. But I think when he talks about the issue of trade, the Democratic Party has to listen, and if it's Hillary Clinton that's going to be the nominee, then she's going to have to react, and to go to the left of Trump, because that's a very, very volatile area in the country that could very easily, the electoral system we have, and unfortunately the voting system we have, and we've seen corruption at the polls and the Democratic primary and the past with the Republicans, that, this could very easily change. And Pennsylvania and Ohio are in the heart of it, and all the polls that show Hillary ahead nationally show her tied in Ohio and PA. And there's a lot that I think we need to talk about. But what I want to ask you is that, do you sense that if Trump decides to say, look, I want to make a mea culpa here. All my products that are made in Bangladesh and China and so forth, I will guarantee you that they will be made in America within the next 3 years. And I want to match every other business person to do the same thing. If he says something like that, I think that not only does Hillary have to react to it, but the Democratic Party has to react to it, because this is how you can steal an election. Because if Americans hear that, which is something you've been fighting for a long time, and have made it America, has been a big, big deal, mainly because of people like yourself and others, and our friends in labor. To me, this is something to keep an eye on, because if he makes that transition, it is going to be on the Democratic Party, because they're going to have to hold the line of labor unions who are not happy with Hillary Clinton's flip-flopping on TPP and a lot of other issues. Your view?
Yes, you hit the nail right on the head, Jeff. And I saw the response immediately on Twitter. The Clinton's campaign advisors were saying, of Trump's speech, "Oh, we agree with all of this. We're good on trade enforcement. We oppose the TPP. We want to renegotiate NAFTA." And I think here's the challenge for Clinton is, and she faced this in the primaries, was that. Right. She's had two positions on the TPP. She has a family association with NAFTA in China that is not a good one in the Democratic Party. And, this is, again, Trump, this is probably his most serious policy speech to date. And I agree with you that on a lot of this, he's hypocritical. He brings a lot of hate to this in a way that I think does a disservice to the underlying issues that are at stake. But it's got to be more than Me Too. from the Clinton campaign. She has to differentiate herself and show how she's going to be even better on this, even more effective. And I will say, as an advocate for this, I want this competition of ideas, and I hope she's not going to join, for instance, like the Chamber of Commerce, who is railing against Trump today because of his opposition to TPP and his support for trade enforcement with China, and realizing that there needs to be some sort of a change in our trade policy.
Well, I think that she needs to do three things, and I know you have to run here, but the fact is that if she wants to win the presidency and win the voters in that part of the country, which are to me very pivotal in the swing states, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, is that she's going to either have to pick Elizabeth Warren or Sherrod Brown, who have both voiced tremendous opposition to the TPP and trade deals as a whole, and of course Ohio, where Sherrod Brown is from, is a big deal. And basically work with Bernie Sanders. If she does none of that and she decides to pick a Castro or decide to pick a Tim Kaine, who don't have the same animosity, the sort of same passion in these issues as Sanders, Warren, and Brown do, I think she's playing Russian roulette, because a lot of people will look at that and say, well, you don't really care about us because you're going in another direction and you're avoiding the real big issue here in these swing states. Your final thoughts, because I know you have to run.
Look, Jeff, you're right, and it's about leadership. I mean, I would say Hillary Clinton, her manufacturing policy platform is great. It's like ripped from our website, basically. I'm not meaning that literally. They came on, they came up with it on their own, but it's a lot of the same idea. But it is about projecting the sense
of leadership. There's a lot
of
good stuff there
as well. It's about projecting the sense of leadership, and you do that through your vice presidential pick, the issues that you're going to focus on, and I agree. I think that has to be a big part of the focus in the coming weeks.
It certainly does. Scott Paul, we know you're going to run. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. We're going to obviously stay on this issue over the coming weeks and invite you back for a longer discussion, maybe for the entire hour if we can make it happen. I just think it's something that's not going to go away, and obviously the UK and the US have a long relationship, and how they how make it work and how they make it work with the EU is also going to be fascinating to discuss too. All the best. Thank you, Scott. Appreciate it very much.
You bet. Same to you, Jeff.
Thank you. All right.